Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey has finally been released in the theaters. And I'm so glad that I got to watch the IMAX 70mm experience after traveling 3 hours across the border into Canada, because that was the nearest theater showing it in the format Nolan shot it in. In a way, this was my personal odyssey to watch The Odyssey. And I must say, if you have any way to see this in the 70mm experience, take it. Even if it means that you have to wait for a few days as the majority of these theaters are sold out, I can guarantee you the patience will be absolutely worth it. The visual output, the sound, the way it sits inside the theater, the way tension builds, not just in the music but in the physical vibration of the projector, is magnified in ways standard projection cannot touch.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
But here's the thing. For a movie that represents the most technically ambitious production in modern cinema by being the first film in history shot entirely on IMAX film cameras, the thing that stays with you isn't the spectacle. It's not the storm sequences, it's not the Cyclops, it's the human story.
No one could stand between me and home. Not even the gods.
This review contains no spoilers, so I won't talk about the overlap between what's in the book and what's in the movie. But before I begin, I want to mention 3 actors who surprised me in this movie. Firstly, Tom Holland as Telemachus. I think this is a coming-of-age performance for the actor who is widely renowned for playing Spider-Man. Second, John Leguizamo, Odysseus' swineherd and his most loyal servant. And thirdly, Samantha Morton as Cersei, who you might have seen in The Walking Dead as Alpha and one of the most terrifying villains of the franchise.
I just want my daughter. I know you have her.
Samantha as Cersei will terrify you, horrify you. I mean, it's tough to explain. When you watch it, you will know why. I will also talk in detail about the controversies, some of which I feel Nolan was using in a way to troll us.
Let's go!
But before all that, let's start with the human story I mentioned earlier. The way a man looks at his wife before he leaves for war. It's the way a goddess weeps. It's the way a son who never knew his father tries to become a man.
Promise me you will come back.
What if I can't?
Homer's epic is on its surface a story about gods, monsters and humans, giant cyclopses, seductive sirens, a man cursed by Poseidon to wander the seas for 10 years. The temptation for any filmmaker adapting this material is obvious. Go make it as big as possible. Make the Cyclops a CGI marvel. Turn the sirens into a spectacle. Let the gods descend from Olympus with thunder and light. And to be clear, Nolan could have done all of that. He had the budget, the technology, the team, but he chose not to. The defining characteristic of Nolan's Odyssey, the word I kept coming back to, the word that serves a narrative repetition in previous Nolan's films, is human. This is a film that refuses to let the fantastical elements dominate. Instead, it strips them down. It integrates them into an emotional reality so grounded that even the gods feel like people you might meet. Scenes between Odysseus and Athena look so real, sound so simple. There's a moment early in the film, and I'm being very careful here because this is a spoiler-free review, where the nature of the gods is established not through exposition but through a simple law, the law of Zeus, also known as Xenia, a sacred unbreakable rule of hospitality that requires hosts to warmly welcome travelers with food, shelter and protection, and dictated that guests treat their host with deep respect. Penelope, Odysseus' wife, is forced to entertain suitors because of the law of Zeus, and Odysseus, far from home, assumes this rule is followed everywhere, assumes that the codes that govern men also govern gods. He is wrong, and the gap between that assumption and reality is where much of the film's tragedy lives. This is how Nolan approaches Homer's epic. He doesn't treat the gods as characters in a fantasy. He treats them as forces, sometimes benevolent, sometimes cruel, that shape human behavior the way governments or institutions or fate shape our lives. You feel them more than you can see them.
Who's looking after your wife and son?
Do you see?
Dad is coming home.
If you are familiar with Homer's Odyssey, you know it follows the in medias res narrative, which means in the middle of things. Characters tell stories within stories, and time folds in on itself. A non-linear narrative, one that perfectly suits Nolan's storytelling style.
Well, the story's written in a non-linear way. It's the original kind of non-linear narrative. You start, kind of halfway through the story.
The film doesn't start with Odysseus setting sail from Troy. It starts with Penelope. It starts with Telemachus, the son who grew up without a father. Only after we have lived in their world for a while, after we have understood what's been lost, we meet Odysseus himself. And even then, he's already trapped, already mid-journey. The story of how he got there arrives in fragments, in memories, in stories told by different characters who each have their own version of the truth. There is no omniscient narrator in this film, and it's one of the most important decisions Nolan made. Because when you remove the single authoritative voice, you're left with something closer to how history actually works. Multiple perspectives, each incomplete, each shaped by the person telling it. A king remembers the war one way, a goddess remembers it another. Odysseus himself remembers it differently depending on when you ask him and who is asking him. Nolan also made hard choices about what to leave out. Homer's epic is sprawling. It would take 10 hours to do justice to the full story. So Nolan cut parts, cut moments of trickery that Odysseus is famous for, and ripples through the story in ways that attentive viewers will catch. There's a particular sequence involving Odysseus trying to remember his past, and I won't say more than that, but the lotus becomes a focal point, the flower that clouds your memory. You know something happened to him, you can feel its weight even though you never saw it, and this and many other elegant moments are visible throughout the film.
You gods don't speak in ways we understand.
Who doesn't understand pain?
Matt Damon plays Odysseus, and in my opinion, this is his best performance to date. When I first heard of this casting, I was not sure if this was a good one, but when you see the film, you will see why Matt is perfect for this role. And of course, the lost and found narrative is something Matt Damon owns, so why not?
We won the war. Help me go home.
Matt plays Odysseus not as a swashbuckling hero but as a man who has been hollowed out by war. He is very in a way that feels earned, not performative exhaustion, not actorly sadness, but something deeper. A man who was once a great warrior and now just wants to go home and has no idea if he deserves to. Damon carries the weight of 10 years of violence in the way he moves, the way he hesitates before speaking. It's the best work he's done in years. Anne Hathaway as Penelope is the film's quiet anchor. While Odysseus fights monsters and battles storms, Penelope fights something arguably harder, the slow erosion of hope. She's waiting, she's been pressured to remarry, she's surrounded by men who wants to claim her kingdom, to claim everything her husband built. Hathaway plays this with a patience that borders on the unbearable, a woman holding herself together through sheer force of will. Her scenes with Matt Damon are extremely emotional to watch and serve a large part of the entire journey of Odysseus. Tom Holland plays Telemachus, the son Odysseus is left behind as an infant. He's a young man now impetuous, desperate to prove himself, angry at a father he never knew and yet somehow loves him. Holland captures the specific vulnerability of someone who grew up in the shadow of a legend, trying to become his own person while carrying the weight of a name everyone else has already defined. Robert Pattinson as Antinous is cocky, snarky, and quite fun to watch at times. He wants to be the king of Ithaca but isn't a worthy fighter, and Robert plays that character with a comforting ease, as if there wasn't anyone else imaginable in that role. In a Nolan film, several notable actors play small roles and make a stark impression. I've already talked about Samantha Morton, but other actors like Charlize Theron as Calypso, Zendaya as Athena, Himesh Patel as Eurylochus, John Bernthal as Menelaus, and Lupita Nyong'o as Helen play their parts well and stand out among a large ensemble cast of actors.
Of blood. The gods told you.
Then I defied the gods.
Hoitevan Hoitema's cinematography deserves its own video. He and Nolan have developed a visual language across Interstellar, Dunkirk, Tenet, and Oppenheimer that reaches its fullest expression here. The camera sometimes moves so close to the actors that you can see the lines on their faces, the exhaustion under their eyes, the actual texture of being human. This is not the glossy, airbrushed aesthetic of most blockbusters. This is tactile and this is very, very real. But the most impressive technical achievement might be what Nolan doesn't do. too. The Cyclops, when it appears, doesn't look like a digital marvel. It looks like a child's drawing of a human, a Picasso version with skewed features. It's not vengeful, it's almost pathetic. It just wants to be left alone. The sirens are seen at a distance through mist. Their song isn't a beautiful melody. Odysseus describes it as the sound of all the promise he has not kept. Be it Charybdis, Scylla or Circe, Nolan stages their acts not as spectacle but as body horror. Nolan keeps the fantastical elements in the corner of your eye. You see the whirlpool, but you see it with the way you would see something terrifying from the deck of a ship. Peripheral, overwhelming, never quite in focus. The camera stays on the human faces, on what it costs them to survive. There is a scene where Odysseus and his men are seeing the wrath of Zeus rain down on their ship. The thunder, the lightning, that entire sequence is cinematography of the highest quality. Ludwig Göransson's score reinforces Nolan's storytelling approach. He uses sounds that are ancient, almost tribal, not orchestral grandeur, but something raw, something that makes you feel like you are in the middle of a ritual that predates civilization. Male choruses build in volume and pace until the theater itself seems to vibrate. Sitting under an IMAX speaker during certain sequences, I felt less like I was watching a movie and more like I was participating in something ancient, something primal. And this brings us to the controversies. Because they do exist and because going into this film I was aware of them. I even made a video on this topic and the casting of Helen did not feel right to me. But let me tell you honestly what happens when you are actually sitting in the theater. The first controversy is the language. In traditional adaptations of ancient epics, for example, Troy, the thematic prequel to the Odyssey, there are characters who speak in a kind of elevated poetic English. It's theatrical, it signals this is the past, this is important, these are not regular people.
Get up, Prince of Troy. Get up. Won't let a stone take my glory.
Nolan throws all of that out because hey, Nolan has his own language, own interpretation, and the audience can agree to disagree on that subject. His characters speak bluntly, directly. Words like dad, daddy, and even F-bombs is poetry in Nolan's Odyssey. And frankly, it works because the bluntness of the language doesn't diminish the epic. It humanizes it, it makes it relatable. The second controversy is the casting of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen. And yes, this casting still doesn't sit well with many, especially because of a version of Helen we all saw in Troy. But there's an explanation and Nolan gives us the clue right in the opening scene. There is no single narrator. The story of how the Trojan War was won is told by multiple voices. Many travelers come to Ithaca and have a story to tell about the trickery of Odysseus, about how the war was won. Menelaus has a version of what happened and Odysseus too has a version which he is telling to Calypso. Each narrator brings their own perspective, their own imagination, their own version of what these people looked like. In a story that is being passed from mouth to mouth across generations, it is entirely plausible, entirely human for different tellers to see different faces. There is also the casting of Elliot Page, who everyone felt doesn't look like a muscular Greek soldier. And the movie has a valid reason for it. When you see it, you will realize it that it all makes sense. More importantly, when you are actually watching the movie, this all fades. About 20 minutes in, you stop thinking about casting choices and start thinking about the characters. What's going to happen next, about what they want, about what they have lost, about whether Odysseus will ever make it home. The performances are so committed, the emotional reality so fully realized that the surface level questions dissolve. I'm not saying you have to agree with every casting decision. I'm saying that when the film is running, it doesn't matter. The story is much bigger than that.
I could take the throne. They're not giving up power to you or Odysseus.
Now, I need to be honest with you about something. The Odyssey is not for everyone. If you expect that every sub-story of Homer's epic should be shown in the movie, then you will be disappointed. If you expect the movie will dwell on Odysseus' tricks and how he and his men have survived, then you will be disappointed. If you are showing up expecting a fast-paced action epic, the kind where set pieces arrive every 10 minutes and the spectacle keeps escalating, this is not your film. Nolan has made a slow-burn, character-driven drama that happens to take place inside one of the most famous adventure stories ever told. The pacing is deliberate. The film trusts you to sit with the characters, to feel the weight of their waiting, to understand that the journey home is not just about navigating monsters, but about navigating guilt and regret and the question of whether you can ever really go back. But personally, I found echoes of Nolan's entire filmography in this movie. The fractured time of Memento, the brutal survival logic of Dunkirk, the cosmic loneliness of Interstellar, the the reckoning with consequence that defined Oppenheimer. All of it is there, but it's integrated so naturally that the film doesn't feel like a greatest hits compilation. It feels like a director who has spent his entire career building towards this moment. It symbolizes his own personal odyssey. It demonstrates the magic of cinema while remaining from first frame to the last thoroughly human. And that's the thing I keep coming back to, the human aspect. And the film's greatest achievement is that it makes you care about a man who just wants to go home.
Bringing it all.
That is my take on the Odyssey movie. A more detailed spoiler review will be coming soon. Let me know in the comments what you liked or didn't like in this movie review. Subscribe if you haven't already and check out our video on the success of Obsession right here. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.